Hey, what's up everyone? It's Mir, and finally in today's video we're going to approach the dreaded frame data. I know that this is a topic that a lot of people find really difficult to understand, especially because they see a lot of numbers and they don't necessarily know what it means, but I will try to break it down in the simplest possible terms. I'll start from something very basic, and then later on in the video I'm going to look at the topic more in depth, and at the end we can even read some frame data charts that may explain how they work for you. If there's anything that I want you to remember from this video before you shut it off, is that frame data and frames are a measurement of time and the properties of moves, and thanks to these measurements we can understand how they behave in game and how we can best use them to our advantage. So first things first, let's understand what a frame means in the context of our video game. So computer and consoles hardware render images on screen so that we can play our video game, and every individual image is called a frame, which are collectively displayed at a certain frequency, which is the frame rate. So right now, for example, Street Fighter 6 runs at a constant frame rate of 60 frames per second, so 60 images per second. And you can see, for example, if I slow the game down to 50%, which is a feature that we have available in training mode, you'll see that it's a little bit choppier, and this is because the game is now running basically at 30 frames per second, which is half the speed. So again, what this means is that one frame is 1/60th of a second, and this is the basic unit of measurement on which the game logic runs on. You might wonder why we're not talking about fractions of a second, like milliseconds, and this is because one frame is the equivalent of 16.66666 milliseconds, and it's a little bit unwieldy, so we just use the frames instead. Now that we know that the game always runs at a fixed frame rate of 60 frames per second, we can use this frame as a measurement of time. And if you look at anything in the game, it could be an attack, like a jab, medium punch, heavy punch, whatever, a jump, backdash. All of this can be measured in frames. We can break it down to its basic, unit of measurement and see how many frames does it take for this move to complete. Like how many frames does it take from a jab to complete, from a heavy punch to complete, from a jump to complete, and so on. In the terms of Street Fighter 6 and almost every fighting game, every action is consistent. So every time I press my light punch, it will always take the same amount of frames. Now, one way to count frames would be to, have a recording and then slow it down and count each frame individually, but luckily enough we don't have to do that, because in training mode, if you open your menu and you go to screen display settings here, we'll have this option, frame meter, which we can turn on, and it gives this bar at the bottom of the screen, which is a very useful tool to help and count frames. As you can see, whenever I press a button, it will be displayed at the bottom how many frames it takes. In this case, it's a total of 13 frames for my standing light punch, and as you see, every time I press it, it says 13 frames every time. If I change the attack, you'll see it's a different amount of total frames, and again, it's consistent, it's always the same. Of course, knowing the total amount of frames of a move is only scratching the surface. It can only tell us so much. It is mostly useful for movement like a jump or a backdash, a forward dash, which don't have any special properties because they're not attacks. So the total duration is really the only thing that we care about. But it doesn't tell us very much about, for example, normal moves or special moves. Again, if we look at the frame tool, you can see how every move is divided into 3 color-coded sections, and this is where frame data starts getting really interesting. Any attack can be divided into 3 different parts. There's the startup, which we see in green, the active frames, which are in red, and then the recovery in blue. The startup is the amount of time it takes for the attack to be able to hit the opponent, so it's all the frames before the attack is actually an attack, so as the name implies, the startup of the move. Usually light attacks have very fast startup, medium attacks are a little bit slower, and heavies are slower still. This is not necessarily the case. There's plenty of attacks that have maybe a total duration that is very long, like for example Jamie's DP. As you can see, the total duration is 66 frames, which is quite a lot, but the startup is comparatively quite fast. Another example would be Isteni Heavy Punch here, which again, quite long total duration, but actually relatively fast startup. Some attacks are slow enough that you can actually react and block them in time, and this is most common with certain overheads. For example, Jamie's overhead here is slow enough that it should be reactable if you're looking out for it. The second part of the attack in red is the active window or active frames. This is the amount of time the attack stays out and is able to hit the opponent. So usually attacks are active just for a couple of frames, like for example the standing light punch here. We can see standing medium punch is active for a total of 4 frames. Standing heavy kick is active for 3. Some attacks are active for longer, usually special moves. For example, this DP is 7 frames active, and this determines again the amount of time the move stays out there so that it can hit the opponent. So, for example, good anti-airs tend to be active for a very long time, which means that you don't have to be as precise for the timing when you're trying to hit an opponent that is jumping in on you, for example. However, some attacks are active for an unusual amount of time, very long in fact, and this is most common in projectiles, as the projectile is basically active all the way to the other side of the screen, depending on the move, of course. Another good example would be Chun-Li's level 1. As long as the projectile stays on screen, that is all active frames, and you can hit the opponent during those active frames. As you see, I walked in there really late and I still got hit. After the active frames are over, we have the recovery frames. So for example, in the case of Jimmy's standing heavy kick here, we have 21 frames indicated in blue. That's the recovery. And what that means is that during recovery, I'm unable to perform any actions, usually. This includes blocking, attacking throws, using movement, using other moves, and stuff like that. So when I press standing heavy kick, even if I hold up, I have to wait until the move is done if I want to jump, as I can demonstrate right here. This is true for anything like forward dash or back dash. As you see, nothing came out because I did it before the move was over. Even pressing other buttons, I couldn't press anything there. I have to wait until the move is over for it to come out. There are some exceptions, like for example, you can block out of the recovery or parry, but for the most part, 99% of the cases during recovery, you cannot perform any action at all. One last thing worth explaining that I kind of glossed over intentionally is that you can see that the frames in green that tell us about the startup at the bottom are different than what the game calls a startup. As you see, there's only 5 green frames, and then the startup is listed as 6. That is because traditionally, the startup includes the first active frames. So in this case, it means that there's 5 frames where nothing happens when I press a standing medium punch on Ryu, and then on the 6th frame, I'm actually able to hit the opponent. So effectively, the startup is 5 frames plus the first active frame, which gives us 6, and this is what the game is trying to convey. All of this combined gives us a lot of information on how moves behave. Some attacks that might have a very long duration, like a Shoryuken, which is in this case 65 frames for the heavy version. Even the light version is 47 frames, might have very fast startup. Another great example would be Ryu's level 3 super. Even though it takes a long time to whiff this, a total of 87 frames, it only has a 5-frame startup, which is not necessarily obvious looking at it. Another one would be attacks with a very long active window. Again, in the case of a DP, you can see how many active frames there are, which makes them great anti-airs, for example, as opposed to something like a jab, which has barely any active frames. There's attacks that have fast recovery. Like I said, light attacks are great examples that don't have much recovery at all, which you can use to, for example, hit an opponent safely while they're using an armor move, and so on. An example of a situation that is very common in Street Fighter 6 where recovery matters is dealing with drive impact, as moves that have a long recovery period are much more unsafe to use against it, as I won't be able to block in time. So for example, if I do standing heavy punch here, even though I'm trying to block, I'm unable to. But if I were to do something like a light attack, which has much faster recovery, you can see how I can block in time, which means I can do my own drive impact back. Another example of where recovery matters is when you're playing in neutral and you're whiffing moves, maybe you're doing a buffer or whatever, and moves that have long recovery are much easier to whiff punish for your opponent. So sometimes using moves that have less recovery might be beneficial because it makes you less vulnerable to whiff punishment. Now that we know startup and recovery, Another extra tidbit of information is that in Street Fighter 6, if you're hit during the startup or the active frames of a move, you're going to suffer a counter hit. While if you get hit during the recovery of a move, you're going to suffer a punish counter. And these properties have extra effects that I'm going to discuss later, but I'm going to show you how they look right now so that you may familiarize yourself with them. So at Zangief to do a jump heavy kick, which is quite a slow move, and you'll see that if I hit him before the move starts up, I will score a counter hit. But if I hit the recovery of the move instead, I will get a punish counter. The last piece of information that ties everything together is what is commonly referred to as frame advantage. This is also listed in the frame tool. So for example, if I hit Jury with Gal's standing medium punch, you can see that it says advantage 6 frames in blue at the top of the frame tool. This describes, in the case of whether a move hits or is blocked, which of the two characters can act first and by how many frames. So if the frame advantage is positive, so it's in blue like in this case, it means that the character that did the move gets to act first. So in this case, Gal gets to act 6 frames before Jury. If I do a standing light punch, for example, it's only 4 frames. If I do a standing heavy punch, I actually have a red frame advantage, also known as frame disadvantage, which means that Jury gets to act first, in this case by 1 frame. You can think of this as turns. If it's blue, it means it's my turn. If it's red, instead it's the opponent's turn. If the frame advantage is high enough, namely it is higher than the startup of another move that you have, you can use that move in a sequence that your opponent cannot interrupt. And what do I mean by this? So using the example of Gal's standing medium punch again, which is 6 frames of advantage, I can use a move that is 6 frames or faster to create an uninterruptible sequence. So something like a crouching medium punch, which is 6 frames, or crouching light punch, which is 4 frames. And this is what we know as a combo, or more specifically, a link combo. So I can do standing medium punch, crouching medium punch, and you see the game says it's a 2-hit combo. And the opponent cannot do anything about this. I can do standing medium punch, crouching light punch. That's the same thing. If I were to use a move that is a little bit too slow, like say standing heavy punch, this is 7 frames. So it's not faster than the 6 frame advantage that we have here. You'll see that we'll never be able to combo them together. And this is how you figure out, using frame advantage, which moves combo into each other. You can do the same thing on block, and this creates what is known as a true block string. In Street Fighter 6, it's a little bit difficult to find attacks that are very positive on block. For example, Gal's standing medium punch is 0 on block, his forward heavy punch is +3 on block, which is just not enough. But a jumping attack is usually very positive, in this case is +9. So I will demonstrate now how a true block string behaves. So I have a Jury set to do a crouching light punch after blocking anything, and you will see that if I do, for example, a standing medium punch into another standing medium punch, that I will get interrupted by Jury's crouching light punch. However, if I do the same standing medium punch after a jump in, they have so much frame advantage even on block that Jury is not able to press anything and nothing will come out. As you saw, the crouching light punch only came out after the block string was over, and this is a true block string. Another thing that's very important to keep in mind for link combos is that your opponent has to be standing and not knocked down. So certain moves like crouching heavy kick almost universally knock down like this. And even though the advantage listed by the game, which is 34 frames, seems like it would be enough for me to combo a move afterwards because the opponent is knocked down, no matter how hard I try, I'm just unable to connect with anything because the opponent is effectively invulnerable as they wake up off the ground. So this is something that you should keep in mind. In a similar manner, if the frame disadvantage is too high, your opponent can attack you with their moves without you being able to retaliate at all, and most notably being able to block. And this is what we call a punish, which is a guaranteed hit. This is most common on block, and a great example would be if I try to sweep my opponent. As you can see, Gal's sweep is -12 frames of advantage, which means that Jury in this case has 12 frames to do anything she wants to me, and I won't be able to do anything about it, including blocking. A very common response in a situation like this is to sweep back. As you can see, if I go and sweep Jury, her crouching heavy kick is completely unavoidable. Even though I was holding down back the entire time, I still got hit and it scored a punish counter. Again, using the frame data, you can discover potentially new and more damaging punishes for any given situation. So we're talking about Gal's crouching heavy kick, how it is -12 on block. I have Jury set to do her standing heavy punch, which is 10 frames of startup, just like her sweep. And if I sweep her and she does standing heavy punch, you can see how it punishes me. And this move, unlike her sweep, is cancelable, so I get to continue a combo here and do a lot of damage. So this is another tool that is very useful for you to find out about how you can effectively get damage on an opponent that is using unsafe moves on you. Something very important to keep in mind for the concepts of punishing and link combos is that the fastest attack in Street Fighter 6 as of now is 4 frames of startup. So in the case of Ryu, for example, would be his standing light punch or his crouching light punch. They're both 4 frames. So if I have a move that is not advantageous enough, even though it might be my turn, I just wouldn't be able to continue the combo. So for example, if I hit Cammy with standing heavy punch, you see that my advantage is 3 frames, which means, again, it's my turn as Ryu. However, because my standing light punch is 4 frames, I won't be able to combo one into the other unless I have, some special properties that let me do that. So this will never be a link combo, no matter how hard you try. And this is true for anything that is negative on block as well. So an example, again, using Ryu, is something like standing medium punch. As you can see, the advantage is -1 frames, so my turn is over. However, if Cammy tries to retaliate with her fastest normal, which, as I've established, is 4 frames, so her standing light punch, for example, she will never be able to punish me. I'm always able to block here just because she doesn't have enough frames to use to punish me, and this move is what is considered safe. Of course, advantage on hit and block is not the entire story. A great example here is Honda. I have him set to do is sumo headbutt, which, as we can see, is -4 frames on block. It's 4 frames of advantage for Ryu. So in theory, I would be able to do my standing light punch or my crouching light punch and it would be unable to avoid it. But as you can see, I'm just too far for the normals to connect, which makes it impossible to punish in this way. This knowledge is very useful both on offense and defense, as it helps you understand whose turn it is and how to structure offense and defense yourself. So in the case of Rashid, for example, if I do my standing medium punch or my crouching medium punch, you'll see that the advantage is 1 frame in favor of Rashid. So Rashid gets to act 1 frame faster than the opponent. What that means is that if the opponent retaliates with their fastest normal, in this case for JP, it's his crouching light punch, which is 4 frames, and I also press my fastest normal, which again is 4 frames, Rashid will come out on top, as I can demonstrate right here. As you see, I'm counter hitting JP because I act faster and we're doing the same length of move, and so I come out on top as my move will hit the opponent first. If you're trying to learn the frame data for a character, I would highly suggest that you make the startup and the frame advantage your #1 priority when it comes to learning, as they are the most important stats to determine which moves to use based on the situation, as we've established before for combos, for punishment, pressure, and so on. Another thing that is very important to know about frame advantage is that there are certain situations and properties that dynamically change it during gameplay. So if I hit JP with Cammy's standing medium punch, you can see that the advantage is 6 frames, which makes this combo impossible, as standing heavy punch is 8 frames. However, if I score a counter hit, which again, as we've established before, happens when I hit the startup of an opponent's move, then you'll see that the frame advantage all of a sudden is 8 frames, up from 6. This is because counter hit always adds 2 extra frames to your frame advantage, which makes that combo from before suddenly possible. If you score a hit on an opponent's recovery, like for example in a punish situation, or if you whiff punish their attack as they whiffed it in neutral, you will get a punish counter, and a punish counter gives you +4 extra frames of advantage. So that standing medium punch from before is now +10 on hit. And this lets us do combos like this, which normally wouldn't be possible. Again, as you can see, the crouching heavy punch is 10 frames of startup, and I'm using the 10 frames of advantage to combo them together. Another situation where we get extra frames of advantage is when I use a drive rush. If you do a normal out of a drive rush, it will be enhanced and get extra frame advantage. So again, using the example of standing medium punch from before, which is 6 frames of advantage, if I do it out of a drive rush, you will see how it is 10 frames of advantage, so we get an extra plus 4 frames. And this property actually stacks with counter hits and punish counters. So for example, if I put punish counter on, the move that is normally plus 6 with the punish counter becomes plus 10, and you will see that if I do it out of the drive rush, we get the extra plus 4 of the drive rush to a total of plus 14. So if you know how to use these together, especially in certain punish situations, like if an opponent is whiffing a move that has long recovery, like a Shoryuken, for example, you can get some very damaging combos started this way. Just to make it a little bit more confusing, another situation where frame data changes is during burnout. Normally a move like Kami's standing heavy punch, for example, as you can see, is minus 3 frames on block. That means it's the end of my turn. It's safe, but I don't get to do anything else. However, if the opponent is in burnout, you will see how now this move all of a sudden is 1 frame of advantage in Kami's favor. And this is because if an opponent blocks a move during burnout, 4 frames of advantage are added to the block advantage. So from minus 3, this becomes plus 1. This is part of the reason why burnout is so scary, is because moves that normally are minus or even unsafe become much safer or plus on block when you're in burnout, which means that it's so much harder to get your opponent off of you, especially because you cannot use any of your drive mechanics as your drive gauge is depleted. So to recap the situation briefly, frame advantage is a measure of who gets to go first and by how much time, again measured in frames because that's our unit of measurement. So sometimes you might have an attack like this one, which is 3 frames of advantage. That's not good enough for me to get a combo or anything like that. It's just not enough advantage, but at least it's my turn still, so it means that I can press buttons after this. Then you have attacks that are very plus, something like this charged for the heavy kick, that's plus 10. That means a combo here is guaranteed as long as I choose the right attacks. On block, you have the opposite situation where you have an attack that is safe. In this case, again, minus 3, it means that there's no attack that is fast enough to score a guaranteed punish on me. And then there's other attacks that are very unsafe, like the sweep, which is minus 11, which means that Ryu has 11 frames to do whatever he wants to me. And there are attacks that are fast enough that can punish me and score guaranteed damage. Now we're going to look at some frame data charts and how to read them. Specifically, we will start with the official Street Fighter 6 frame data, which is now available on the Street Fighter website. You can see this by going to the Street Fighter 6 website, going to characters, and then you will be able to see the frame data right next to the command list at the top of the page. So as an example, let's use Chun-Li's standing light punch. We can see that the move name is listed first with the input, so standing light punch. Then we have the frame data proper with the startup frames, the active frames, and the recovery frames. The way the active frames are listed in this format is that it basically specifies a range. So in the case of the Chun-Li standing light punch, we see that the startup is 4 frames, and then the active frame is a range from 4 to 6, which means it's the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th frame of the attack are the active frames, which means we have a total of 3 active frames. And then we have 7 frames of recovery. Then we can see the frame advantage both on hit and block. In this case, plus 5 frames on hit and minus 3 on block. Of course, there's much more information on this page, including cancels, damage, combo scaling, and so on, but this is beyond the purpose of this video for today. Another kind of chart that you might find is something like on fullmeter.com with their Frame Assist Online tool. They also have an app, I believe, or the Super Combo Wiki where they have the Street Fighter 6 Wiki, which is listed like this. And this is the more traditional way of doing a frame data chart, where you have the move name first, and then you have startup, active, and recovery, frame advantage on hit and then block, which is very similar to how we have in the original Street Fighter website. However, the active frames are listed as a number as opposed to a range like they are in the Street Fighter website. The difference here that it's very important to keep in mind is that the first active frame overlaps with the first startup frame. So in the case of Chun-Li's standing light punch, for example, we can see that she has 4 frames of startup, 3 frames active, 7 frames of recovery. However, if we add all of these together, we get a total of 14, which is actually 1 extra frame compared to what it is in game, which is 13. And like I said, that's because the first active frame overlaps with the last startup frame. So that's something to keep in mind if you are doing your calculations on the fly. You need to remember to remove this 1 frame as there is some overlap. I highly suggest you familiarize yourself with these frame data charts, as they are something that is very useful to consult quickly in case you have a question about, whether something is unsafe, how unsafe it is, or the startup of some move that you've never seen before, and so on, without having to go to training mode and actually test it for yourself. So this is a very valuable resource that, like I said, you should familiarize yourself with. As a final section of this video, we can look at some practical examples on how to use frame data, again, just to drive the point home so that I'm absolutely clear. This involves some basic arithmetic, but it's nothing to be scared of. So I've talked before about the concept of a true block string, which is basically a string where your opponent is unable to mash in the middle of. So I have right here Blanka to do a standing light kick, that's his fastest normal attack. And if I do a jump in and then another attack, you can see how I was plus enough that Blanka was unable to attack in between those 2 normals that I did. However, this is only useful to a certain extent, as the opponent is not in any risk because they can just press the button and nothing will come out, as it's just too tight for anything to come out. What we want to use is a so-called frame trap, which is a situation where we use a move that is plus on block, like for example Ken's heavy dragon lash kick, and then we specifically try to leave a gap so that your opponent can press a button, but because we are at a frame advantage, we're going to hit them before this button is out and score a counter hit. So in the situation that we have just here, I have Blanka to do is light kick, which is 4 frames. And after my heavy dragon lash kick, I'm going to press my crouching light punch. As you see, they both are moves with 4 frames of startup. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, Blanka's standing light kick is 4 frames, my crouching light punch is 4 frames. So the reason why Ken comes out on top and scores a counter hit is because the heavy dragon lash kick, again, is 1 frame of advantage. So Ken gets to act 1 frame earlier. And now I created a situation where basically, regardless of what your opponent does, as long as it's nothing invincible, I get to stuff them and continue my combo. When you are performing a frame trap, you're most often going to score a counter hit, which gives you 2 extra frames of advantage that you can use to get a better combo. And in some situations, it's particularly useful. So in the case of Luke, his crouching medium punch is +1 on block. Again, it is my turn afterwards, and I can set up a frame trap here. So if I have Cammy to do a reversal light punch, my own crouching light punch will beat hers. However, if I try to do a normal combo at this range, my second light punch just doesn't connect. But thanks to the extra advantage that we get from that counter hit, I get to convert from far away by comboing into my crouching medium punch instead, which is a counter hit only combo. Something else that is fairly common in Street Fighter 6 and Street Fighter in general is blocking something that is unsafe but not using your best punish that you have available. And this is because you might not know the frame data. So a great example here is Jury. She's doing her light pinwheel, which is an unsafe move, and a lot of people either don't know that and fail to punish it entirely, or do a very simple punish like jab jab special, something like this. I'm sure you've seen it plenty of times. But actually, if you look at the frame advantage at the bottom of the screen, you can see that I have 8 frames to act. The move is -8 on block. So if you want to compare the damage of these 2 punishes, just to show you the difference, you'll be surprised by how much it can change if you use your best punish and use the frame data to your advantage to discover what it is. So first I'm showing the light punish from before. As you can see, it does little damage. If you are a more advanced player, maybe we might do a basic punish counter combo to get some extra. But if you do an actual punish, you'll see how much the difference really is. As you can see, we've almost doubled our damage just by doing the correct combo. And this is true across the cast. There are plenty of examples like this. So knowing frame data can help you understand situations like these and optimize your punishes accordingly. Again, to go over the concept of a basic combo through linking, we have more examples here. I'm going to do it with Ryu's standing medium punch. Now, Ryu's standing medium punch, as we can see, is an advantage of 7 frames, which means that any move that has a startup of 7 frames or less should combo as long as the range is right. So we can see that Ryu's all of his lights, they're 5 frames or faster, so they should all work, and they do, because they're all in range, as I can demonstrate right here. Of course, some of them are more desirable than others. Then we can see all of his mediums. His standing medium punch itself is 6 frames of startup, so it actually combos into itself. Then we have crouching medium punch, that's also 6 frames, and it combos correctly. However, his medium kick is 9 frames, which is too slow, and his crouching medium kick is also 8 frames, which is too slow. And as you can see, I won't be able to combo them. The game doesn't register this as a combo. I will need something like a counter hit or a punish counter for this to be effective. Another thing that we can see is that his back heavy punch is actually 7 frames, and if you're very close to the opponent, that is indeed a combo. So you can use the advantage of every move to figure out combos in a variety of situations. For example, with the knowledge that we have here, that standing medium punch is 7 frames of advantage on hit, and knowing from what we said before that if you score a punish counter, you get an additional 4 frames of advantage, we can determine that it should be 11 frames of advantage. And as I can demonstrate right here, it is. As you can see, it's plus 11. A move that is 11 frames or less is a standing heavy punch, 10 frames, and as such, this combo is now possible. So these are just a few examples of the power of frame data and why it is important to learn it so that you may use it to your advantage to learn more about your characters, about your opponent's characters, and how to make the best out of any situation. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and it was useful to you. I understand this is a more complicated subject and a lot of people find it very difficult to approach, especially because they see a lot of numbers and they get scared. But as long as you break it down in simpler concepts, as I tried to do in this video, I think it's much easier to approach. And hopefully you can see the power of frame data and how it can help you improve your gameplay in Street Fighter 6. Now, it is not so necessary to know the ins and outs of the frame data of every single character, as long as you know when it's supposed to be your turn and maybe the most notable moves that you can punish that your opponent might do on you. And this should be good enough, at least for a beginner and intermediate level, to continue playing the game and learn more about it. Of course, I understand this is a more complicated topic, so if you have any questions on the matter, please do not be afraid to put them in the comments below. We will try to answer to as many as we can, and maybe someone else in the comments might be able to help you as well. We have plenty more guides like these planned for the future, and we already have a playlist of guides on the channel, so if you're interested in other things Street Fighter 6, make sure to subscribe, and there's gonna be more videos on the way, as I mentioned. And I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!